summit. Now, first of all, the biggest achievement there was the logistics. It was a logistical nightmare, believe me. Right from the airport, parking spaces for planes. I mean, we talk of parking for cars, parking, shortage of parking spaces, the movement of these delegations, coordinating them to hotels. They all reached within the 30 seconds. Three times I saw the Prime Minister receiving them, first at the summit inaugural at the Bharat Mandapam, and second at the President's dinner along with the President of India, and third time in the morning at the Rajghat. So that coordination it went off like clockwork. So major logistical security and major logistical challenge which I think we met, and I think we are going to leverage it. We don't directly link it, but it's not a coincidence that we have put in our claim for hosting the Olympic Games in 2036, if I recall correctly. Of course, Olympics is a completely different ballgame from holding a summit, but the success that we have had, I think we will try to leverage this to get the first Olympics to our country. On substantive side, the very first decision that the summit, the Prime Minister on the first morning of the ninth announced was the inclusion of Africa. Now, as I mentioned to you, there is an Africa deficit in the membership of the G20. We addressed it for our presidency by getting these three African countries, but then it would have ended there. We tried to redress this on a permanent, on a sustainable basis. And we took the initiative and we got the canvas and we got the support of all the members. So African Union joined as the 21st member of the G20 on the summit body. And I think it's a major decision. First time the G20 was expanded in 24 years of its existence. It is also very good. India's presidency and summit will be remembered. It also gels extremely well with our theme of Vasudeva Kutumbakam on one side and it resonates with our priority of the global south. So that was another major achievement. The biggest challenge of the summit was the geostrategy. I mentioned to you, it has been anointed, G20 has been anointed as the premier forum for international economic cooperation, but there were a lot of skeptics, believe me, because of the problem of Ukraine, who felt that this will be the first time we will not have a joint summit. It is to the credit of first our leadership and our negotiating team, brilliant diplomacy, obviously, and to craft the language and finesse the differences, just identify the red lines so that everybody is equally dissatisfied or equally satisfied, and we were able to get the communique. Not at the end when it normally happens, but by the in the afternoon of the first day itself. Obviously, the G7, because as I said, alone we can't do. We were helped by other members, G20 members of the global South. But the G7 made a concession. Ultimately, it belongs. The G20 is a creation, and they had to take a step back when it was clear that the Bali formulation on the Ukraine would not fly. So that was really something when people, the world thought that it was only perhaps India that could get a consensus thanks to our standing, stature, power, all everything. It was a whole of government and whole of India's effort, if I can put it that way. Then, of course, we have six priorities. Very briefly, I don't want to get, you will know, we had identified six priorities, and the summit came out with a very rich menu of achievements on all these six. The first one was obviously the climate and the environment, lifestyle for environment, life. There are high-level principles there. There are a lot of finances which have been identified for addressing climate change, adaptation, mitigation, all the rest of it. There is also this thing that we should adopt at the level of individual country and the world a lifestyle which will translate into a cleaner, greener, bluer future for all. There is the PPP, the Pro People Planet Network, and things. So that is the first priority, and a lot of achievements was our digital. The technological transformation of what is called the digital public infrastructure. I don't need to tell this gathering our achievements in the digital side, Jan Aadhaar, the Jam Infinity, India Stack, etc. We were able to administer 2 billion vaccines through the COVID app in an orderly manner. The various UPI platforms which all of us use and things like that. For the first time, EPI came on the agenda. We have been trying for a long time, and we have, of course, offered many of these platforms to the others to take them. The third was the SDG goals. Obviously, these are lagging behind, also affected adversely because of the pandemic, etc. So, trust has been identified there. Then, of course, personally speaking, I would have liked a stronger formulation on the ODA from developed countries, their commitment, but it is there. But as I said, so sustainable development goals to be taken forward. The fourth, food security and energy security. It is clear that the developing countries, the global south, is suffering today from food crisis, fertilizer crisis, energy crisis, debt crisis, climate, etc. And nobody seems to be listening to G20 exist in a holistic manner. Then fifth one was the gender equality and women empowerment. Seminal achievement there was the move from development of women to women-led development. And I think again it is no coincidence that the bill for the reservation of 33% seats in our legislature for women came soon after the summit, though there's no direct linkage to it. And the last but not the least is the reform of the multilateral organization. You know that today most multilateral organizations do not reflect ground realities. They are of a different era. We saw United Nations is ineffective with regard to Ukraine. The IMF and World Bank are crying for reforms. The WHO came up short during the pandemic. WTO is dysfunctional with regard to its dispute settlement, and so on and so forth. So it is the reformed multilateralism is the need of the hour, a demand of the global south, and therefore a priority. And just to conclude on this thing, there has been so much, if you just look at that, we have the Deccan principles on food security and nutrition. We have the Chennai high-level principles on blue economy and ocean economy. We have the Goa roadmap on tourism. We have the Jaipur call on industry and SMSE. We have the Kashi cultural pathway, the Gandhinagar achievements on the women's side, and so many more. So very rich agenda of achievements. This was our achievement in the summit. Two side events are important. One, the Global Development Pact. We came up with a futuristic food sustainable biofuels. The Global Biofuel Alliance has been announced. This is, of course, start of a new process, the GDA. Similarly, crypto has been brought first time into this, that there will be, again, it's a starting of a process, it's signaling a start, and also the side event of what is called the IMECC, India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor as a connectivity project. So these have all been the achievements of India. Ultimately, I think a very successful summit. It was not possible just by the Ministry of External Affairs, not possible just by the central government, not possible by just the governments, all the governments. It had to be a whole country affair, and I'm very happy that it was a whole country affair. I'll stop here. Thank you for your and I will be happy to answer any questions later in the program. Thank you and धन्यवाद सभी. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jens, for enlightening us with your profound insights and expertise on India's spiritual achievement. Your presence here today has added great value to our lecture series.
I would like to now invite Professor Amita Priyadashini, Head of Department of Commerce, to introduce our executive speaker of Dr. Narendra Modi.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's indeed a pleasure to introduce our second speaker for today's event. The Dean of the National Institute of Advanced Studies, NIA, and alumni of St. Joseph's College, Professor Narendra Pani. Welcome, sir. Professor Narendra Pani is an economist by training who takes a multidisciplinary approach to the Indian political economic issues. In this effort, he has relied on a method derived from the writings of Gandhi. Over the last 3.5 decades, he has held positions in academia and the media. His books include Inclusive Economics, Gandhian Method in Contemporary Policy, Redefining Conservatism, an essay on the bias of India's economic reform, and Reforms to Preempt Change, Land Legislation in Karnataka. He is also one of the editors of Bengaluru in Imaginations and Their Time. He was a member of the Task Force on Manufacturing set up by the government of Karnataka in 2013. Professor Narendra Pani has won the Citibank Pan Asia Journalism Award of 1992. The award was given for writings on trade issues. The piece that won the award was on the environment as a trade barrier. He has to his credit many publications on various issues related to challenges faced by farmers, inflation, and rural employment. It is indeed a pleasure to have you here, sir, today. And I now invite you to take over and deliver your lecture on India Tomorrow, the World Perspective.
Thank you. It is indeed a pleasure to return. It's been 50 years since Ambassador Mukul had met at Los Angeles, 50 years since I met. So it's a long time, and there's obviously been a lot of change. And when you look at what's at the same stage, used to visit this campus only every weekend because you had a ground where cricketers were being transformed and where people were being transformed. Football cricketers being a test cricketer right on this ground. And you had other changes that were taking place around us at this time. When we look at those changes, there is a certain sense of pride, how universities is. And there is also a certain sense of nostalgia about something that we have left. This sense of being left behind or leaving behind something is something that all change happens. When there is a change, we leave behind something. But you would tend to ask yourself, is there anything there that perhaps we have gone too far with? I was first in a course that had economics honors, which had 18 traces of economics. I don't think today, but that's a good example. It creates a sense of something that might do it. When you look at India's role in the world tomorrow, in the changes that locally so elegantly brought out. When you look at that process, at the back of our mind, there is the same question. Have we at some point started more than we should? There is no doubt that when you look into the future today, we are changing. Yes. India is growing massive from a country that is your deprivation at the time of independence to where we are today. Phenomenal. let me keep probably distracted. But the main issue is that we have changed and have changed dramatically over the last 75 years. And that would turn our ability to influence the world and be influenced. Our very role in the world will change, whether it's in terms of the nuclear power, whether it's in terms of doing my part of the economy, every word, I think the same is. But the story is not just about that. It's also about how is the world changing and how do we relate. And the world is changing in a way that is equally dramatic or perhaps even more. We start soon after independence, after the coming from the second World War, you had a bipolar world. You've seen since then, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the impression of having a unipolar world, which was largely a region of slightly emotional media, because essentially it no longer came to recognize China, or you even see the emergence today of a multipolar world in a variety of ways that it was normally applauded. You have Biden flying to Israel to offer them support. You get them to, he talks about how Hamas is different from Palestine, but yet he cannot convince Israel to begin. Even the most powerful nations in the world today are unable to convince people who are based who are functional with their support. So the main element then is that you have to be a changing world and how do you adapt to it. And for India, that challenge has been one of adapting to use a post-non-aligned world. As long as you have a bipolar world, non-alignment was a major step forward. But as you move away from a bipolar world, non-alignment began to just as an alignment, which began to do in profit. And this change as distinguished the bureaucracy was made rapidly in the legislative systems of progress. There is always a chance that perhaps we may have things maybe it is just possible that we have to start. And that is what I would like to spend the remaining 35 minutes talking about. But in order to do that, we first need to give ourselves some basic simple analytical tools which we can use to understand vision to change occurs in global politics. And I think there are three kind of elements that we need to look at to understand. One is what's happening to power. This is something that's widely used in global politics. That's taking power equations, economic powers, the geopolitical strategies. But it's not the only aspect, because the very way power is used itself, there is a substantial difference that we can't ignore. And that's the difference between power as a form of control and power as a form of influence. As I was just saying in the situation in Gaza, that Biden announced in Israel is supposed to move on to Jordan and Muslim status. But the Jordan visit is cancelled. There's no influence there anymore. So he's funding technically should be controlled. Israel is quite Northern and in fact, you might even say there's a reversal of that when the United States are affiliated with the Security Council of the and it's a really country voting against. So you have a complete process, a much more complex process, even in the element of power, where the power that's controlled is no longer a category of power. Transactions that are available are also continuously changing. You have the options that are created through nation states, that is through various alliances that you can put together. But there are also options that are emerged by bypassing nations. We tend to ignore it. But if you take labor and environment standards closely known for that, it was first tried that the country potentially goes through nation states at the WTO. In 1999, that's fair. But then with the latest garment manufacturers, country gas and other garment manufacturers, they started imposing labor and environment standards directly on the manufacturers. They just bypass the government. You end up with a system of alternative elements that come in to a sense of new options that emerge. But the last aspect of the last we are quite content. We think that it doesn't matter. It's all about power, people, suicide, and other things. But repeatedly across the world, we realize that there is a sense, there is in the appeal to people. Almost all the major changes in the world that have occurred have been through an appeal. Yes, even in the 1970s, when the Vietnam, not Vietnam won the Vietnam War and drove and fought the US retreat, it was the appeal to freedom that did that. And you can see that it's seen as a part of the independent movement back in the 50s, but I would argue in the collapse of communism, the rule was there for the appeal to freedom. Even from done through soft power. When I was on the side of back in the 70s, you had the Voice of America, you do the best music, the best factories, the best one, I don't know, but there was a certain influence that came in with there. Beyond what genes coming up from Woodstock. And the movie. Today, I noticed that it's still in but the entire movement came about through what we call soft power. They changed the way we dress. They changed the way we spoke. They changed the way we other kind of music. The entire process occurred without an emphasis on aggressive numbers. In fact, it emerged from the very ballot hold feelings. It was against and you could think of anything that you like, but it changed the way we live. This process was something that I would argue, and I should correct me if I'm wrong, was deeply entrenched and understood by very few people in the world. And I would think that India was one of the few countries that understood. It understood it that in a bipolar world, there was place for the other countries that were not part of the society, a part of the bipolar. Whether it was Soviet Union or the US led global. At the time when the rest of the world didn't understand it, I think there were a few parties in there, there was the aspect, there was whatever. But essentially, you had the making of the non-aligned movements as a sense of recognition. No matter how powerful everybody is, you cannot wipe out the individual sense of freedom, the individual sense of freedom. That it's an idea that came originally from Gandhi, and it was, used in a way very different from the way Gandhi would have liked to have it. But essentially, it was an idea that fairness is a part of our. It's like when you meet a bullying class, no matter how much the bullying might try to control you, there will be an element of functioning within that class that create groups that is true. You have a process that is there at different levels, and I think the best example of the way this dynamic works was India's position in Bangladesh. Just remember that in 1971, right, we had the non-aligned movement, but we were not an economic power of any country. It was just 2 years since we had stopped the exploration. We were not militarily in a position to stand up to it. But nevertheless, Mrs. Gandhi went to the United States. He was able to stand up because he had leveraged the influence of the He had leveraged which he had institutionalized it with the people of so that when the US sent its military to Bangladesh, and they were not in a position to make it became entirely symbolic. You have a process there which is extremely big upon elements of power. Power as control was there to the extent that you were able to win the Eastern Front. But I would think even there, power as control was not working on the right side. Once again, if I'm not a person, involvement, my father was in the army at that time. He was focused on the right side. You and I had a news department on security. The cycle there to keep track of what was happening on the Western Front.
It is primarily about unity. How well we were doing that. Western France was getting, I think that is a critical aspect of the limits of power and control, even in our greatest military. Look, foreign global influence occurs for something like that. You were able to create options and you were able to see man not as a creature, but as an instrument of our independence. The eventually, I think, here from the US, we were able to take further support on the idea of freedom and of our participation. Can you observe the process that I said? Because you also have the model identity. I would argue that our strength, our military strength and success is enormous, but were released as opposed to the relative sort of status quo in the transplant was largely because of the fact that you had support from local community. I'm not in any way discounting the tremendous increase of certain tremendous service. As I said, my father was in the army, so there was a tremendous natural pride for what found of this. This that essentially there was local support. There was the idea of freedom. There was the idea of fairness coming to play in this context, even when the US was on the side. Right? So this process, which is non-alignment within the bipolar world, which comes when it came up against the idea of globalization. Globalization is sometimes seen in black and white terms as a fully global or fully national. But it is not having some of you are studying. You know that of but especially globalization is specific that you bring across. It could be capital led, like the IP. It could be labor, like the time like when people might be here to the US or corporates remote data and this is that you get a kind of supply service. But when people migrate across the world, you find that nationalism itself is. So it says that you remove nationalism to globalization, what you get is the globalized people. Today, your first responses to anything that answers is something you also get nationalism getting globalized. It's not just media. In Palestine, yesterday, at the US the process of the globalization of right. So these initial pressures were primarily on the Soviet Union, each of its member countries independent, and the fact that they couldn't compete in the global scheme ensured that it collapsed. So the impression was that you moved from a bipolar to a unipolar world. And in that, as the US tended to take the lead, it assumed this was now the sole superpower, and therefore it abandoned its entire, I put not entire, very substantial part, the control of the fairness. In our generation, when the US spoke about democracy, it spoke about fairness, there was a certain appeal, and they were able to leak out the idea of freedom. That is abandoned for reasons that one is significant. Okay? And as we moved out, when we saw China willing to create the ocean emerging, creating the possibility of multiple. So this kind of a world, we had the initial issues, what do we do with our economic? How do we deal with our economic? How do we function there? The initial effort of the world was to say, all right, we move from free trade to trade and we negotiate systems and try to have common laws across. Because I have a supply chain and I'm functioning in the US, I must make sure people here follow the same norms. If I have labor standards broken here and then people stop buying my brand in the US, the whole system is. You begin to look for global coverage. So the first step was really to create some specific global norms. We moved quickly for the human to but the idea of common living conditions became greater. The second, of course, was on the important the options that countries had became reduced to their supply chain. and the supply chain now could get this. We have garment industries moving suddenly to India economy, and the manufacturers really get left behind in that process. You get these kinds of movements over Vietnam. So you get these kinds of movements occurring across the world. Now, of course, you're hoping to benefit for those moving out of China. You get these processes that occur across the world and create the world. This brings to the forefront the issue of fairness and suffering. How do we function with the element of fairness? How do we try to bring we have element of fairness at global standards on labor and environment? What does it do to us? Do we say we alone can decide that, or do we say everyone decides it in a way to reach out to the markets to be more accessible to these groups? And to be those entities taking the to take the sovereignty view over the payments. It does not try to function in WTO. It functions primarily on support all through the pretext, and then later on Africa, which took a position against, say, on geographical indication, against geographical indication, but one champagne got there, and then later on you found that foreign companies were taking over elements of personal aspects, including elements. Suddenly you realize that you have to try and have it. But you still have a tendency to reject anything that affects sovereignty. You're not the rest of the world, or many parts of the world are willing to trade their sovereignty for it. So that if they can give up some of the terms, as long as they can get it. So you are now left in a situation where you're dealing with bilateral agreements. And that's always going to be difficult because suppose the country's interests are changing, the supply chains are changing, and you make an agreement on one set of products, and by the time it's time to function with it, those products change. The equations change. Right? So you would have then dealing an issue of world with national governments and now this global process. The processes over which no national government. So in the case of economic power, of course, there is multiple resource centers, so people get very difficult resources get distributed, quieter, smaller countries reaching to other centers. So eloquently pointed out, let's try to reach out to them and G20 and other countries, expanding the group of G20, what I think they have mentioned 43 history to trying to bring in the new elements within that. But there still remains some uncertainty of this because nobody quite knows what are the need patterns. There are also the issues of diasporas and as people start migrating across countries, the local countries get local governments get better, and Britain, for instance, is trying to take a tough line on migrants, and it's using migrants to do and so it's got that ability to function, but it's going to you're running into difficulty because Britain's economic crisis today is partly because of that. So if you break the attempts at globalization, you end up with particular elements within it. You also have the problem of national markets and the size of market, the national demand and the size of market. One gets it, but in the moment it gets it, your market size shocks the economy. So finally, there is the problem of the decision that fairness, despite everything, you actually go back to Hamas or Gaza and Israel. The superiority in power of Israel and over Palestine today, there's no comparison. And yet, across the world, there is a difference. People are not willing to accept everything that Israel does without changing. Israel has in fact lost some of the credibility we have had in the 1970s. And that is an issue that people will have to come to terms with. Fairness does not go. It's ultimately as long as they remain humanity will be. So the question then is that has India got an opportunity that it's not? India has an advantage if it seeks to dominate the fairness, if it take a leadership role in the fairness of social beneficial. First of all, you shouldn't underestimate the role of symbolism. Right? Whether we may not be doing it in India very much, but across the world, there have been Indian leaders who have influenced the understanding. It's not easy, like even those who attack family at home, who they would go stay at home, tend to find it necessary to when they go abroad. So that is the power of symbolism which is available. If you could, if there are, if you shape. There also is a long history of successful movements like the Rangero movement, the Choti movement. You got rid of kinds of social stigma like untouchability. It is something very few countries which get over with comprehensive thing, relatively short period of time. And more important from a point of view of international negotiation, other countries in the world are handling this. The fairness is now going to actually bring on. But I think when you look at what's happening, the fact that I'll go back to Security Council, the fact that the US was actually the only country to vote against the ceasefire. Ceasefire is something that is a lesson that I think we look at. We need to go back in some sense to what we did earlier, and that it recognize that the power of influence need not be in the power of country. Thank you.
Dr. Narendra Sani, your words have widened our perspective on the subject and deepened our understanding of G20 talk. We will now proceed to the question and answer sessions, where our audience will have the opportunity to ask questions and engage in a dialogue with our esteemed speakers. I would like to invite Mr. Syed Ali from Research and Information Systems for Developing Countries, Ministry of External Affairs. Thank you, Mr. Ali, for graciously accepting the role as the moderator for our question and answer session. The experience and the expertise that you bring to this table, I will surely ensure that our discussions would be fruitful. As we begin the Q&A session, I encourage the audience to actively participate and take advantage of this unique opportunity to also engage with our distinguished speakers and gain further insight into the G20 summit. Please note, audience, also the Q&A session will be for a total time of 10 minutes. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're really finding this opportunity where we had two great lectures back to back. And your alumni, we have done a great job teaching you about the international affairs going on, be it Ambassador Mukul's intervention about G20, the role it has played for India and the road ahead, or Dr. Narendra Sani's, in general covering about India's protection tendencies to globalize nationalism. It's a great opportunity for all of you. Now the door is open to take more and more questions. We are going to go in rounds. Try to keep your questions as short as possible. Your name, the question, and to whom the question is directed. So now we keep the door open. We are going to take three questions in the first round. Go to the students first and then we come to the faculty. Yeah.
My name is Emma. My question is to Mr. Mukul.
Does India's foreign policy of strategic multi-alignment or non-alignment affect its stance on the G20? And if so, how?
Next question.
Good morning, sir. My name is Abhay Pratap Singh. So my question is, the current situation is going on there in Hamas. The dispute is can be arised between Saudi Arabia and the Arab nations and Israel. So as there was a delay declaration of IPAC, so how India can deal to settle this dispute between Israel and the Arab nation, and how can it like better it? Yeah, okay. How will it?
My name is Sanjay. My question to you is, how does the G20 engages with the issues of income inequality and social justice in its economic policy?
Thank you.
Okay. So these questions. First let me look at G20, the Israel-Arab question that was asked. Now, as we pointed out, it is best to see your strategic, controversial issues out of the G20. We saw that we almost failed at the Delhi summit because of the Ukraine event. It is an premier forum for international economic cooperation. So that should be the objective. But you're right. In real world, it doesn't happen. If there is a crisis happening, leaders will raise it, countries will raise it. And that is the way we finished it in the Delhi summit. On your question on, I mean, this is now beyond G20, your question on Israel and Arab world dispute. I think the world, including India, has a very consistent, long-standing policy on this. Our policy has been that we support the Palestinian cause, we stand for a two-state solution, Israel and a state of Palestine living side by side in secure borders, in peace, etc., to be brought about through negotiations. Oslo I Accord of 1993 and Oslo II of 1996 came to this. In fact, even Israel has accepted this. It is unfortunate that the Israeli Prime Minister Rabin got assassinated, etc. At that time, and the extreme right, etc., has come in, and that's the domestic politics of Israel. The fact of the matter is that India supports the legitimate cause of Palestine. But that does not preclude our developing strong relationship with Israel, which we have, covering agriculture, drip irrigation, defense, space, etc. So there has not been a contradiction. The Israelis have understood this. The Palestinians have understood this. Now, with regard to the latest problem, obviously nobody accepts these kind of civilian casualties. That is why you saw when the first attack happened, 1,300 or 1,400 innocents were killed. The Prime Minister immediately spoke to the Prime Minister of Israel. And recently, when the hospital thing happened, or yesterday, I think the Prime Minister again spoke to the head of the Palestinian Authority. So yes, we are into both of, I mean, we have this dual approach, which is not unique to India. The world has this. Even Israel accepts. It is unfortunate that the Israelis have not given effect to this, and the Palestinians remain under occupation to this day, despite the Oslo, etc. accords. I hope I answered your question. It is not a G20 issue. Let's be very clear. It should be out of G20. I hope it is not coming to the G20. Otherwise, it will disrupt, detract, and even derail the G20.
Majority have two more questions. One was like how India's foreign policy is impacted by the G20 proceeding by Emma. And another question from Saras is how do you think the G20 platform combat income inequality? See, on the issue of income inequality, all the elements that are there are priority. I pointed out among the six, just to take one example, the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. I mean, they are all working towards, development. So when we talk of the global south, it is development that is the key. And we have, if you read the 37 page or 80 or whatever paragraphs of the G20 declaration. There are any number of elements there trying to help in not just India, the global south as a whole, because it's a multilateral forum. So that I think is embedded into every aspect of the declaration. And I pointed out the spirit of the global south permeates throughout the declaration. Maybe I would like the young lady to ask a question because I think there is a slight, what exactly did she say? I would like to ask that. How does, so if, tell me if I'm wrong, do you think India's multi-alignment can impact India or not? Is that it?
My question was, does basic
Keep the mic closer.
You can maybe come up here to mic not work. Walk up to the door.
Yeah.
My question was that India's foreign policy is strategic, multi-alignment or non-alignment affect India's stance in the G20, and if so, how?
Now, the pointed out. Non-alignment was the appropriate policy in a particular context. That context was the Cold War context or the bipolar world. We have not moved away from non-alignment. That's my submission with due respect. What has happened is that the context has changed. Today we are not in a bipolar world, we are in a multipolar world. And therefore, non-alignment, which was an appropriate policy in a bipolar world, has today become a multi-alignment or an all-alignment in a multipolar world. In fact, as I see it, non-alignment and multi-alignment are two sides of the same coin, depending, adapted to the context of the world. So this is the way I see it. Now, when you look at it from the G20 perspective, in fact, India is the one which was building bridges there. The biggest success was to get the communique. You had actually a bipolarized situation because of Ukraine. You had Russia, China on one side. In Bali, they had accepted a criticism of themselves. And the G7, the West was trying to impose that same formulation, but they said no, things have moved on. And therefore, the G7 had to make a concession to in order to, but it was countries like India and others who had been perceived to be broadly non-aligned or neutral or whatever you want to call it, bipartisan, Indonesia, Brazil, South Africa, and others who helped us to craft the communique. So that is the way our non-alignment or multi-alignment, whichever you want to say, helped us in terms of getting a successful G20 communique at the Delhi summit. Do I answer your question? I'm being asked for one last question, but I'm trying to push it to two. So two quick questions. We'll directly take the questions from that.
Thank you, sir, for your lecture. My name is Dave. My question is to Professor Narendra Pani. Can you please elaborate the role of symbolism as you pointed in your lecture?
I have, we have a distinguished international negotiator, right? But I would think all negotiations, if I may, go beyond this involve a process of statement, a requirement, and a response. And in both cases, you're negotiating not just on the words, but also the larger impressions you're giving. What are you going to stand for? The words can be then played out about teaching and associated with particular. But when you're identified with a larger set of ideas, you fail to do that. Ask them to stand up and set up. The fact that India was identified with, with not being on one side or the other, the kind of non-alignment. That would certainly be a sense of neutrality. That impression, that symbolism, that brings that neutrality will become option. It is not something that you just take if these are the questions that taken across the stage. But you get an advantage when the country as a whole is identified with somewhere. When Switzerland talks about neutrality, rightly accepted because they're doing it for a large number of years. They're identified with it. Sometimes they might even get away with slightly violent policy because of that earlier symbolism. The symbolism is, I think, an understated part of all negotiation, including Asia. If I may just add by way of concrete examples, last week, which you see, President Biden traveled to Israel to stand side by side with the Israeli. Whatever he had to say, he could say sitting in the White House. That was a symbolic gesture. Conversely, the summit, as Professor pointed out, which was to happen in Jordan in Amman, was cancelled by the Arabs. Why? In order to protest what had happened in the Al Ahli hospital bombing in the Gaza Strip in Palestine sympathy. So this was symbolism trying to express their displeasure with the United States. These are just last week examples, hundreds of them. Thanks.
Thank you so much, sir. I really love for your discussion. I just wanted to ask you, Ambassador. We also had the SEO leadership this year. We also did a lot of work with BRICS during this year. So I feel like in that context, if we broaden the same arguments we made today, I feel like India has a much more spread out presence in the world today. And taking forward from that, sir, Professor Pani, we were talking about fairness and international relations today. So instead of looking at a conflict like Israel-Gaza or a conflict like Russia-Ukraine, there is no one black and white truth in it, right? So there's a lot of grays that we cover. How do we choose, or how does India, when it's largely looking at both sides of the coin, how do we choose to be fair sometimes when there are multi layers to certain conflicts that we face?
The last part of your question, I'll try to answer. This is a very unique feature of India's foreign policy or diplomacy. And I'll give you 2, 3 examples very quickly, which will explain this. One, of course, is the Israel example where we have excellent relations with Israel. Though they are antagonistic, so bitter rival, we are able to maintain. If you see in Delhi, you have the Palestine embassy there, the gift of India, and you have other relations with Israel and things like that. If you go back to the G20 summit in Osaka, two summits back, the only country which was able to hold 2 meetings on the sidelines, we did not get perhaps such sort of notice or recognition. What were the 2 meetings? One was the meeting of the RIC, Russia, India, China. The other was the meeting of the JAI, Japan, America, India. No other country on the sideline of the same summit does a link. You know the relations between Russia, China, and the Japan and America. We were the only ones who were able to do this. This is very unique. If you look at the Gulf, Iran and Saudi Arabia before the latest patchup, were antagonistic. I have served in Saudi Arabia in the Gulf many times. Very antagonistic relationship, but we were able to maintain excellent relations with both sides. We had good relations with Iran, and we have our diaspora, oil flowing, and all the rest of it.
with the Arab or the Gulf countries and including Saudi Arabia. So this is something that has been very much there. Now, whether you want to call it non-alignment, you want to call it that is all it's jargon and theory. The fact of the matter is, in practice, we are able to do this, which is a very unique feature of our diplomacy. The issue of fairness is not something that you take event by event. In any event, is you will get it's a complex situation. If something happens here, or something happens there. The question is that are you willing to be unequivocally condemn Israel for the violence of children? It's a state. You're condemning Hamas. Hamas has been doing it, etc. Are you willing to do it? Are you willing to unequivocally condemn a state that behaves like a terrorist organization? That compares itself, its actions to those of a terrorist organization. Second is that if you're pushing for fairness, you can encourage countries to make that distinction. That if the state behaves like a terrorist organization, you would go along with it. You must recognize that this idea of response to terrorism by targeting the civilian population is one of the most unfair principles. It's cost 1 million lives, I think, in Iraq, and it can cost a similar number here, or if it's a smaller place, probably less. But the idea that you can target the civilian population for the acts of terror is fundamental. Where no country is taking that position. It becomes, I'm not really sure it is a position that is useful in any way, because what you're doing right through is you're associating a country with a terrorist organization. You're forcing Palestinians to line up behind Hamas. And at each point when a